Hi Booktube and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads for 9 books, including a fair few new releases. Rebecca Watson, I Will Crash. Natasha Brown, Universality, recently published. Samuel Beckett, How It Is. On the Calculation of Volume 2 by Danish author Solvej Balle, translated by Barbara J. Haviland. My Lesbian Novel by Rene Gladman. The Deserters by Mathias Enard, his latest book, which was translated by Charlotte Mandel. Our Long Marvellous Dying by Deforest. Rene Belletto, Coda, translated by Alison Waters. And finally some poetry, A.E. Stallings, This Afterlife. So I'm going to start with Rebecca Watson. This is her second novel, a follow-up to Little Scratch. And what I really like about Little Scratch is how adventurous it is formalistically. There's like sort of 3 columns of dialogue representing the sort of fragmented nature of how an individual thinks, of sort of thoughts cross-cutting across other thoughts, shutting others down, being overridden by them. This is not as formally daring, but actually I think is a superior read. If anything, this is sort of more lyrical. Again, it is that sort of fragmentary sort of inner monologue, but it's not done as formally in across 3 columns like it is here. But that's not to say that this isn't sort of beautiful writing. So what it is a young woman who is with a partner, and one evening she gets a knock on her door, and it's her brother. And she's basically slams the door in his face, sort of tells him to get lost, he's not coming in. And we realise that this brother tormented her during her childhood. And 2 or 3 weeks later, she gets the news that the brother has died in a car crash. Now, the title, I Will Crash, when I sort of first saw it, when it was listed and, as a book to buy, I hate that title, but actually it's absolutely sort of front, centre and fundamental to the book, because one of the things from her sort of teenagehood is she's driving in the car with her brother, or her brother's driving, and he wants the telephone number of her best friend because he wants to go out with her, and she doesn't want to give it up, and because she knows what he's like, and he says, well, if you don't give it to me, I'm going to crash the car. And he speeds up, and it's a sort of playing chicken with him and his sister, and of course she gives up the telephone number. And indeed he does start going out with her best friend, which sort of takes her best friend away from her, because of course, as so often happens in new relationships, partners sort of abandon their friends because they're so sort of intensively involved, and it's an abusive relationship basically. He's very manipulative, which she kind of has experienced herself firsthand, being a sister to him. So she sort of mourns for her friend, and in the end her friend does indeed commit suicide. And now her brother's dead. So all of this stuff is churned up by the news of the death of her brother, plus her own guilt about, the last time she saw him, she slammed the door in his face. And so we get sort of back detail sort of fed through the novel about the relationship in childhood, both of her parents who are separated in the current time period of this novel, and what their views are towards both the dead brother and towards her. Her partner is brilliant initially, but then he has to go away to a conference, so she's left on her own. I mean, she's given him her blessing to go away to this conference. And it's very sort of, in a way, it's very everyday, it's very small, it's very beautiful, because of the language, because of the lyricism within it. There's lots of sort of internal rhymes. It's almost poetry, and in a way I compare it to, what's her name? Taylor, who wrote The Night Alphabet. Is it Noel Taylor? Joel Taylor. It's not quite as poetic as that, because Taylor is actually a poet. I'll leave my a link to my review of Joel Taylor's The Night Alphabet. But I really love this. As I say, not quite as daring as Little Scratch, but in a way I preferred it. 5 stars. And on to a real British literature darling, Natasha Brown. So her first book, Assembly, got a lot of rave notices, got shortlisted for, I think, the Goldsmith Prize. And it's a good book. It's very short. If I've got a video review, I'll post the link to it. I thought it was good. I didn't think it was sort of knocked down brilliant, but it was nuanced. This is the exact opposite. This book desperately wants to be Hernan Diaz's Trust, in that its structure is sort of 4 or 5 narratives giving different perspectives on basically the same event and the same people, but it can't hold a candle to Trust. So it starts off with a journalist who's going around all the characters in a news story, and the problem is that the characters that this journalist is going around, they're all caricatures. They all represent a political position, because this is a book about politics. And I always applaud books that try and encapsulate politics, but unfortunately a lot of them fall foul of the same thing, where they don't write real characters, they write people representing positions. So what do we get here? We get a boo-hiss banker, we get a right-wing journalist spouting culture wars bile, and just for the sake of balance, they're in the blue corner. For the sake of balance, in the red corner, we have a radical commune who are trying to live an alternative lifestyle, and the main protagonist out of that, she started as a child in Occupy, the Occupy Wall Street movement, although this is set in Britain. Was yanked out of that by her parents, who insisted she finish her degree. She becomes a Marxist, then she gets involved with Extinction Rebellion and the climate crisis. So she's in the red corner. Now, I appreciate that if American viewers to my channel, you have to flip those, that the journalist and the banker are in the red corner, and the sort of commune folk are in the Marxists are in the blue corner. Always very confusing to the British why your colours are that way round. Anyway, and there's a line in here which sums up the problem, which is India, who's the main character of the left-wing commune, obviously. India is tall, 6 foot exactly, with mouse brown hair styled in long dreadlocks, loosely tied back. Her organic cotton face mask bobs as she speaks. Wearing an oversized wax jacket with heavy boots, leggings and a cropped t-shirt that occasionally flashes her pale midriff, she looks like a revolutionary hippie from Central Casting. And the problem is all the characters here look like they're from Central Casting. So there's an incident that the journalist sort of pieces together, almost in detective sort of fiction style. And all of the characters are involved in one way and another. Then we move to the second section, which is the journalist who put all this together, who wasn't named in part 1, but we're told her name is Hannah. She'd been really struggling as a journalist because of COVID. She was a freelancer, so she wasn't furloughed. She wasn't able to get any stories filed because no one was sort of printing them because of the whole sort of, overwhelming nature of COVID dominating the news. This is a couple of years later, after COVID, and after her story about this incident has blown up to the extent that they're even going to dramatise it in a TV miniseries or a one-off drama or whatever. So, it's helped sort of pull her out of a deep hole. And she holds a dinner party for 3 of her oldest friends who sort of abandoned her because she was a struggling journalist and wasn't able to sort of keep up with them and go to the expensive restaurants and things like that. This is the first time she's been able to get them back together. And it is one of my least favourite set pieces or tropes or whatever you call it in any literary form, be it stage drama, be it film, be it books like this is. The 2 I hate, one is courtroom scenes and the second is dinner party scenes where you've just got people talking, which is really just people expressing political opinions, their positions. It's dreadful. It's sixth form. Then we go to the third section, where we start to see some of the machinations that have led up to her being sent on this assignment during COVID that opened the book. And the right-wing journalist has also profited off this because of her connection to the story. She was the person who sent this journalist to track it down, but somehow she's benefited even more because of her personal stake in the story than our younger journalist. And she's used this to be able to shift her position, where she's gone from a sort of right-wing rag. She's gone to the left-wing Sunday newspaper in the UK called The Observer, but she's still spouting her culture war stuff. She's just made it she's just tweaked it enough that it fits in with their worldview. Now, another problem of political fiction, and this is not Natasha Brown's fault, is that the saying politics, a week is a long time in politics. And indeed, about the time that this book was being published earlier this year, The Observer, which is a real-life newspaper, was cut adrift by its sort of parent company called The Guardian, who published the weekly left-wing paper in this country. And it was bought by Tortoise, and is slowly being, or not even that slowly, from the soundings I hear, is being turned into a right-wing platform. So it doesn't really affect this book, and it shouldn't really affect one's view, but I couldn't help but snigger at the fact that that's turned out her shift from left to right is so horribly, beaten by real events. But that's not Natasha Brown's fault, obviously. And no, we get the banker who has basically been disgraced by the events that were originally reported on. He's tried to rebuild his life, rebuild his connections, rebuild his life with his estranged wife. So basically, capitalism is terrible, everybody's shafting everybody else, everyone's on the make, everyone's manipulating everybody, that all these views are held, even by the right-wingers, they don't believe in, they're just using it. And that's not a very terribly sophisticated analysis. I wonder who this book is written for, because if people on the right, on the conservative right, read it, it's such a caricature of this banker and this right-wing journalist. But they're not going to see it as a caricature. They're just going to nod sagely, go, yeah, we like the values of these people. Whereas people on the left are going to say, oh, these people are disgusting, they're cartoon clowns, which is how they're sort of presented here, which does them disservice, because of course then sort of people on the left smugly think, yeah, aren't these people terrible, without understanding what motivates these people other than wanting to get ahead and do well financially. There is a line in here which is very relevant, which is that the shift in politics and the sort of the sort of collapse of sort of left-right distinctions into sort of general sort of populist mass has come about because more and more people feel disenfranchised, and that's absolutely true. But the left have never been able to sort of take on the reasons why people feel disenfranchised and to try and do something about it, which is why people lurch to ideas of immigrants taking their jobs and sort of people sponging off benefits rather than working. And the left, as has been proved in today's left, it's not left at all, but it's nominally left Labour government, who are not addressing any of the fears of people feeling disenfranchised. So the analysis in here is really, I don't know who it's aimed at. It's not convincing. Everyone, the characters are cardboard cutouts, and the set piece, which is a right-wing, the right-wing columnist is being interviewed at a big literary festival by one of the mates of the younger journalist, who's a more successful journalist than she is, but not as successful as the right-wing journalist. It's supposed to be a sort of a set piece, a showdown between the two, where each is trying to humiliate the other, and it just falls flat. I mean, nothing really happens. And I thought at one point that this book was going to go in an interesting direction, in the Hernan Diaz Trust direction, but it didn't even do that. And what I mean by that is, so we have the reportage, or the putting together of events in part one, And part 2, the journalist announces that it's going to be made into a TV show, but the executive producers are making certain changes, including changing the ethnicity of one of the characters and changing the politics of the right-wing journalists, all this sorts of stuff. And I thought, this could be a very interesting thing on the difference between reality and truth against fiction, and the deliberate fictionalizing of something for sort of popular perception or whatever. And it threatened that, but it never really developed it, unfortunately. I think this book is trying to trace where this lurch in politics, as I say, from left or right divisions into a more sort of atomised and yet congealed sort of lumpen middle of people feeling disenfranchised and feeling very angry. But its analysis of that is not good enough. And I think it's also trying to say things about how identity politics is sort of at the root of this. But again, its arguments are not crystal diamond cut clear, and that's a weakness of the book. So I actually gave it 2 stars. It really annoyed me in so many ways. And just to say that every character in the book feels a victim inside. This comes back to the idea of being disenfranchised. But so many of these characters are privileged. Even if they didn't start out with a privileged upbringing, they become entrenched in positions of power, a journalist, a banker, that, they're not victims. They may feel victimised, but they're absolutely not. They're not even disenfranchised. Anyway, as I say, just a mess. 2 stars. Samuel Beckett, How It Works. This is one of his later novels, and it comes down really to being pure language. If you're at all familiar with Beckett, you'll know what that means. So I can't tell you what this book is about. I could hazard some synchronicities, symmetries. It's a book in 3 parts. I believe the first part is about the singular monad, the single unit, the single human being, the physical body just trying to survive. So in this case, as is typical with so many Beckettian characters, particularly in his drama, more of which are none, seems to exist in this sort of eternal darkness, but he's not dead. And he has this sack which contains seemingly unlimited tins of food and a tin opener. So that's his dietary nourishment taken care of. To get liquid, to get water, moisture, he has to lick the mud that forms the floor of wherever he is. And the sack he then uses as a pillow when he sleeps at night. I say at night, when he goes to sleep. But the sack also, because it's a container, and when he's emptied it of the tins, when he's taken all the tins out, it sort of has infinite possibilities. So he's sort of wondering and speculating about what it represents. So that's very much the first part. And throughout this, the language is just beautiful. It's poetic. It's lyrical. It's quite stripped down. There's lots of internal, again, assonance in it. Part 2, there's a character called Pym who joins him on his journey. And this is about a relationship. So if you imagine in part 1 he's a dot or a spot, and in part 2 he's still there as a spot, but there's his second spot, and you could draw a line and suddenly they're related, at least in 2 dimensions. And the relationship between him and Pym is that he is tormenting Pym, that Pym is almost his servant or his slave. And then we go to part 3, where Pym has gone, and our protagonist, I feel unjustly, feels that Pym has abandoned him, even though he has, tormented him. But what we get here is him speculating again about, well, there's this line joining me and Pym, but there must be an innumerable number of these dots being joined by lines. That is what the world is. So he's doing a lot of sort of mathematical, almost geometric sort of speculations. And that's kind of all I could give you about this book, other than if you like Beckett, you'll love this. If you're not familiar with Beckett, this isn't a great place to start with Beckett, I would say. As I say, it's one of his later books. I thought it was fabulous. I thought it was 5 stars. And to me, the thing about Beckett is you have to read everything by him, ultimately. because everything makes a contribution to this mosaic of sort of genius literature. Each one is slightly different tone, different language, different imagery and stuff. Particularly, I think in a way that when he reached this sort of this pitch and apotheosis of language, much like Joyce did in Finnegan's Wake, I think it speaks to the fact of what he went on to do in his later drama. There's lots of his short plays are all about the central image. So you get, I think it's called Happy Days, where you've got a woman buried up to her neck in detritus. You've got, what's it called? Not I, where the actor's face is blacked out, so you can't see it, and all you can see are the red lips, speaking this sort of logarithmic, if that's the right word, or logorrheic, monologue. You get Act Without Words, where you have two sacks on the stage, and this sort of long pole comes and prods one, and the person sort of rises out of the sack and does their sort of daily rituals, ablutions and all that sort of stuff. Yawns, then goes back into the sack, and then the rod comes from the other side and pokes the other sack, and the same thing happens. But the point is, these two people never meet. They have no relationship. They're unaware of each other's existence. So there's lots of these sort of images about, about sort of our existence. And everyone sort of says Beckett is a sort of nihilistic existentialist, which, there's an argument for, but I think actually he's finding these brilliant images of what the human condition is, and that's why I say you have to read everything by him, the plays, the books, the poetry, because although his central concerns are always centred around this notion of what it is to be human, he finds almost an infinite number of different ways of exploring and expressing this, of which this forms part. 5 stars. On to the calculation of volume 2. So I haven't read volume 1, and that was a deliberate choice, because what I'd heard about it is it's Groundhog Day, if you know that film Groundhog Day, and indeed this book opens where the character has re-experienced November the 18th for a whole year, and is desperately hoping that when that year turns over to the second year, they'll be released back into a normal calendar. They'll get their life back. And unfortunately for them, they don't. It's more of the same. It's more November the 18th. And we get a lot initially about the first 30, 40 pages about her reactions to living the same day over and over again. And you think, wow, this, after the first book, which I haven't read, like Beckett, has found innumerable number of ways of probing and thinking about and exploring what that sensation would be like. But then the book moves on, because the character comes to a decision. It's November the 18th, but she's craving for winter because her time has stopped. She's experiencing the same weather and the same atmosphere every day, and she thinks, I can change this. I can head further north, where it's closer to winter, closer to Christmas, closer to New Year, and I can experience winter. She knows that it's likely to be artificial. For example, she visits her family, and they have to them an early Christmas on November the 18th, but she can counterfeit and feign that it's Christmas Day. Same thing in New Year's Day, when she's up in, I think it's Norway. So she's sort of counterfeiting and creating this sense of movement in time, when all she's doing is moving in space, and she's manipulating the weather by where she's choosing to be. But as one of the people she meets is a meteorologist, and the meteorologist sort of says, yes, the seasons have certain expected sort of climates, warm in the summer, cold in the winter, snow versus tropical storms, whatever it is. But the notion that these form seasons are not a meteorological phenomena. They're a pattern-seeking imposition by human beings. Now, you can say, well, actually, because of the nature of growing food and agriculture, seasons are a thing, or they are certainly a thing in nature. But this meteorologist is pointing out that it's really a human imposition of pattern forming, of pattern seeking. So after the winter, she decides she must have summer. So she reverses her journey back down towards Spain, It's still November the 18th, don't forget, but at least it'll be warmer down there. And on her way, when she's in Dusseldorf, she stays there for a while, where it's still autumn. And this is the one error I found in the book that annoyed me. She is swept up on a local subway train in a football crowd. And it's a big match between two teams who are fighting it out for promotion to the highest division in the Bundesliga. The problem is the Bundesliga runs until May. So there would be no promotion battle on November the 18th. So that I felt was a mistake. I even went to the point of looking up the Danish football season, whether, because they have a winter break, whether you could get promotion in November. Maybe she'd sort of elided that to the German, but in fact, no, the Danish league also runs till May. So I was slightly annoyed by that. But I will say, overall, this was a curious reading experience. It had lots of interesting ideas. I enjoyed it, but I feel I can't make a judgment on it because this is the second book out of 7. There's a seven book series. Now I assume they're all going to be on the notions of, again, a bit like Beckett, space, time, what it means to be alive, what is life. Towards the end, we get the notion that she's living. Her November the 18th is a container that she's in a gilded cage, effectively. So she's going to apply this container concept, I believe, into book 3. And also at the end of this, I don't think it's a spoiler, she has set up a date to meet a guy who seems to be also trapped in his own Groundhog Day. I assume that's going to form the basis of book 3. A lot of really interesting ideas here. What she's doing is she's populating, because she has to sort of counterfeit this notion of time advancing. She's populating different sensations and experiences by casting back into her memory and trying to replicate them, such as the family Christmas, such as the sound of creaking stairs as a house cools down in the summer. That takes her back to her childhood. So she's sort of using her memories to populate the present in order to give the impression that time is advancing when it's for her it isn't at all, which I thought was a really interesting idea. And then having done that, she's brought with her on this journey a coin, an old Roman coin that she was given by 2 friends in book 1 when she was in Paris. And she decides that she's going to, that this coin is out of its time because it's in the 21st century, and yet it's a Roman coin. So using that as her inspiration, she reads up everything about Roman history, Roman culture, Roman life, and she populates her present while she's in Dusseldorf, this stay here for, I think it was sort of towards 6 months. She populates it with a historical Roman world. She invests her reading and her research into her imagination so that each day is different, but it's unlike using her personal memories from the past in order to recreate the future or the immediate present. She's now gone so far back. I'd say a lot of really interesting ideas here. I gave it 4.5 stars, but that can change on the basis of reading the others. I would like to read them all, I think. And as to when I read the first one, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 3 to 7, assuming I'm still on board with this. And when I finish, therefore, volumes 2 to 7, then I will read volume 1. Because the reason I didn't want to read volume 1 is I didn't want to read a Groundhog Day in which there was no movement. The beauty of here is she's made a definitive, peremptory decision to try and counterfeit movement and advancement in time. That's what led me to pick this book up, whereas I had less interest in the first. As I say, I'll only read the first if I read all the others, because obviously then for the sake of completeness I have to read the first. But I don't think I'll read it. I want her to keep developing this concept that she set up so brilliantly. And on to my lesbian novel by Renee Gladman. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars. It's got the format of a notional interviewer, who's also a personal friend, of a writer and artist. And the interview that they're having is about her approach to writing, to creativity, on a new book, which is a lesbian romance, which I don't think she's written before. And so we get the interviews sort of periodically throughout this book. And then we get the text as she's writing it almost in real time, but it's not in real time. And a lot of that text is inspired and comes out of the interview and some of the questions, because she writes by the seat of her pants. She's not a planner, and oftentimes she sort of comes to a halt because she's not sure in which direction she's going to take it. So it's basically, as I say, it's a lesbian romance novel that she's writing. She's done an extraordinary amount of reading of the genre, and there's a lot of analysis and criticism of tropes within the genre. She's not writing any of those tropes, she's writing her own version. But as she says, often characters are not ready to be in novels, that they're underdeveloped, or they're too stereotyped, too archetypical. And that, you know, this book is seasoning in her head, and also through these, you know, as the interviewer asks her pertinent questions, you know, what caused her character to do that? Where do you think the character's going to go and take, you know, in which direction? And the whole thing, both the interview and the text, is a brilliant meditation on, as I say, creativity, writing, literature, characters and characterization versus real people, real sort of personal psychology, sexuality, obviously, and the nature of romantic literature as a whole, as well as lesbian romantic literature. But it's, you know, there's a lot of sort of real life, not real life, there's a lot of analysis and criticism of the genre itself and certain titles, which I assume are real books. It's not a genre I read, so I don't know. And there are many artists and other real people quoted in here, one of which is an artist called Barbara Chase Bidou, who's a sculptor. I think she's still alive. And she's also a writer and a poet. And she quotes Bidou by saying that there's some of her work can only be expressed in sculpture with materials, and others can't be expressed in materials. It has to be expressed in words, in language, in writing. Whereas, interestingly, I feel Gladman, or the protagonist in this is going, no, all mine is a single language, that when I draw, I'm drawing lines, and by that she means sentences. She's not necessarily writing words, but she sees her lines as sentences. And equally, when she's writing, she sees that as shapes and things. It's a really intriguing book. There's a lot of very interesting stuff going on here. So this goes back to what I was saying about that she's not a planner, that she's what we call a pantser, seat of the pants writer. So the interviewer goes, not a fan of the plan. And the R. Rachel character responds, not this kind of plan. For me, writing is improvisation. It's responding to problems of space created by the previous sentence in a paragraph, or by the question of beginning, say a new chapter, a new day, or moment of perception. Knowing beforehand, then laying it out, that's something else. I guess that's building, but that kind of building doesn't lead to the kind of architecture I want to occupy or sign my name to. I want mine to be alive, responsive and impossible. I really like that idea of it's responding to the problems of space created by the previous sentence in a paragraph. I just think that's a really interesting way of conceiving how to, basically how to write. So one of the things the interviewer is getting slightly peeved about is that the June, who's the main character in this lesbian novel, is meeting up again with someone she met in London but didn't really remember. And this character that she's meeting up with is not named. And this is proving a bone of contention with the interviewer. So would you admit that June is unreliable? Rachel. Rene. June is unreliable. Rene is unreliable. And probably you too. Bearing in mind that they're all fictional characters in a novel, of course they're unreliable. Seriously though, I like the idea of the uncertainty trope, but I have to push back against the idea that it's merely a device. I am often uncertain in my work because I do feel a need to pair fiction with some minor occurrences in my autobiography. Again, a really interesting idea. Normally you say sort of the autobiographical or auto-fictional elements of a writer where something, an event that happened to them, they put into their novel and work on it to, you know, change the names effectively and maybe change it a bit further. She's going, no. I have these events in my life, but I need to pair them with fiction. Otherwise, the events, I can't hold the memory of my events. They're sort of evanesce. Again, an absolutely fascinating idea. And of course, one that blends the notion of fiction and reality. And then finally, again, this thing about naming June's prospective partner. Can't you name her anything? I mean, what is going on here? And Rene replies, for me, this is a pivotal moment. Reclaiming this memory is utterly essential. Determining whether it is even a memory. There's a small chance I was waiting to name her until she became a full presence in the novel, as if June needed to first understand the value of the British woman's existence before I allowed myself to see her fully. Or it would be near simultaneous. June would know then, I would also know. But why didn't I write this out in one of my journals? I know. You think I'm obsessing. I tried to discuss this with friends the other night. I thought a riot was going to break out. So, as I say, I just love this because there's so much to think about as a writer and a creator. 5 stars. And on to Mathias Enard, The Deserters, his new book. I was hugely disappointed by this. So there's 2 narratives going on. One is in the Second World War, one is in the post-war period from the sort of late 40s to the 60s. The Second World War narrative is a soldier is deserting from his army, and we don't know which army that is. Is it the Axis or the Allies? We don't know, we're not told. And he's making his way to the mountains so that he can then cross the border into what he sees as safety. And the halfway point of his journey is his family's summer cabin. So he goes there and he's sort of holding out there until he's ready to move on to the final part of his journey. And he hears another person, even though it's quite remote, and it turns out it's someone else who's also fleeing the war, but she's not a deserter, she's a refugee. And he's very worried that she's going to, if he lets her go, she's going to blow the whistle on him. And the story unfolds. I'm not going to spoil it for you. And it's rather a conventional morality tale. So that's the first story. The second story is a maths prodigy, genius, who ended up in Buchenwald, and his lifelong partner who managed to stay out of the hands of the Gestapo. When the war's finished and he's liberated from Buchenwald, he wants to go back to Germany, which is the Soviets have taken over and made into East Germany. And his partner is staying in the West. So they're split apart by ideology. And they have a daughter, and the story is sort of relayed through the daughter's eyes. That she's very much sort of bouncing from one to the other, a bit like a ping pong ball. And by the 60s, the late 60s, the man has died. When the Berlin Wall comes down, sorry, that's not true, he hasn't died in the 60s. He dies after the Berlin Wall comes down. But after his death, his lifelong partner wants to honour him in a sort of academic setting, a conference, I suppose. But she wants to hold it on a boat on a river in, is it in Berlin? Well, wherever it was. Anyway, and the daughter kind of has to organise it because her mother's quite elderly by this time. And so we get all these other academics and stuff, and it doesn't really go anywhere. It's not very interesting. I mean, through the daughter, we get the relaying of the past history of her mother and father. The most interesting thing is what's not developed. That his most famous his most famous publication is a brilliant treatise on some mathematical concept, but it's also within that volume there's poetry and there's his writing on his experience in Buchenwald. And that's the book I wanted to read. And yes, it would have had lots of abstruse maths that I probably couldn't have followed. But this book can't even... Yes, it gives some of his poems, supposedly written in this book, but this book does not deliver on the promise and it had a much higher promise than what it actually did deliver. I couldn't see the point of the book. I couldn't see how the two stories interlinked at all. I initially thought that maybe the female partner, the mathematician, was the woman who our deserter was holed up with. But no, the timings don't work because she's in Belgium working for the resistance. So that doesn't work. I just couldn't get my head around what was going on here in any useful way. And the book fell down for me for that. So I gave it 2 stars. And then I started thinking more about Mathias Enard, because up till now, he's been one of my famous writers. I started off with the Imperious novel Zone. And this is a book about the whole Mediterranean region, the history of the whole Mediterranean region, all the different countries, all the different machinations between these countries. But why it works so well is its form, is its structure, whereby there's not a single full stop. That's not strictly true, but I'm not going to go into it. Because it's been narrated by an intelligence officer who is travelling on a train across the Mediterranean countries, because he's going to sell all the secrets he's accumulated in his job, all the secret intelligence. And he's sort of relaying them to us in the book. And it's done breathlessly to the rhythm of the train. And it's fantastic. Then we got Tell Them of Battles. Then we got Compass, which is sort of 1001 Western Orientalists. Again, a sort of almost continental history of Western Orientalism, and it's fine. Then we got this, Tell Them of Battles, Kings and Elephants, which is about Michelangelo, and is beautifully written. I mean, the thing about Enard is he can turn a really nice sentence, but it's straight. I say it's straight history. It isn't. It's imagined, but it's sort of formalistically, he seems to be veering away from the formal inventiveness of this with each book. And then his previous book, The Annual Banquet of the Gravediggers Guild, lovely, fun read, absolute hoot in the middle section, but it's straight storytelling. And I've really veered away now from Enard, who I first encountered as this sort of daring formalist. He isn't. He's a storyteller. You know, this is called Tell Them of Battles, Kings and Elephants. And this is the Annual Banquet of the Gravediggers Guild, which has a central section about the Gravediggers Guild's annual Beano, annual, booze up. It's straight storytelling, and I'm much less interested in that. And whatever The Deserters was, it's 2 stories, supposedly intertwined. And I'm far less interested in Enard if all he's going to do is spin us yarns. You've got a continent worth of stories here. How do you deliver that? Well, he came up with a structure that did it, and he's failed to do anything similar since. Just to give you an idea of the quality of his writing, because I do find, as I say, he turns a good sentence. So this is when he's first sort of captured the woman. The deserters first captured the woman. You can't let her go. She knows you're here at the cabin. She knows who you are. Does she know who you are? Fear is on her face, but who wouldn't be afraid? Suddenly she recognises him, and her terror grows. He is the son of the ironmonger, and the thought is stifled in her brain, reaching neither language nor image. Again, I love that concept. It's going back to what I was saying about Rebecca Watson and how our minds actually think and conceive thoughts. Here he's got, and the thought is stifled in her brain through terror, reaching neither language nor image. So a certain amount of frustration I felt with this book. I think I gave it 3 stars just for the quality of the writing, but I have no idea really what he was trying to achieve. And Deforest, Our Long Marvellous Dying, a novel. It isn't. It reads like memoir. It reads like it doesn't even read like autofiction, to be honest. There's nothing that she does that is novelistic in this. She is training to be a palliative doctor, end of life care doctor. And how do you deliver the news that someone is going to die? There's no cure for them. And a lot of this book, in the beginning, she spends by complaining that the training is useless, that there's no way it equips you to inform relatives of their loved ones are going to die in any useful way that helps them at all. And she gives sort of, effectively, I suppose, case studies, but it's not going anywhere. And then we have a chapter that starts off with a brilliant takedown of the self-help book industry. I mean, it's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. But then the rest of that chapter is all about lockdown, and which obviously increased people's isolation and also meant people died alone. And again, I couldn't see what that had to do with the beginning about the self-help industry books. And really, this book was just really annoying me. It did get better towards the end. It did actually give a few meditations of her own on death. You can't break the news in a way that soothes anyone, but you know, the philosophy of trying to do that, of why we try, and what happens when people burst through that, they won't accept, you know, that you know, you can't sugarcoat such terminal velocity news, you know. So there were one or two bits towards the end where I thought, oh, this finally we got to the point of this, but really it wasn't a great read. 2.5 stars. And on to Coda by Rene Belletto. So this is a very short book. It's 64 pages. You'll race through it. Good fun, though. Basically, it's about a seeming crime has been committed of the kidnap of the protagonist's daughter. But as he's sort of moving towards the conclusion that she's been kidnapped, it's very much ambiguous as to, there are all these signs and events of things that seem to have happened, but do they automatically lead to the inescapable conclusion that his daughter has been kidnapped? So it's about sort of circumstance and coincidence, and again, how we pattern form, how we have to stick and impose a narrative on it to yield meaning at the end, almost like a sort of an equation or a flow chart. That's how our brains work. I thought it was very clever, very, very kind of sneaky in that way. It's very short. So it's not profound in that way because it's too short to be profound, but it races along, it rollicks along. I enjoyed it. 4 stars. And finally, some poetry. A.E. Stallings, This Afterlife. So Stallings is a proponent of more classical approach to poetry, that is metre and rhyme. And she herself is American, born or grew up in Athens, Georgia, but has married a Greek man and moved to Athens, Greece. And so this is sort of selections from 5 of her published collections and some miscellany at the end. And her earliest collection is called The Afterlife and is chock full of mythic Greek characters. And what she does so brilliantly, I feel, is the blend between preserving the sort of epic, mythic nature of these characters, but also talking about them in very domestic, everyday terms. And I thought that how she sort of juggled that was brilliant. And I liked so many of the poems of these. So this is called A Lament for the Dead Pets of Our Childhood. Even now I dream of rabbits murdered by loose dogs in the dark, the saved-up voice spilt on that last terror on the springtime of lost baby rabbits, grey and blind as moles, that slipped from birth and from the nest into a grey blind rain, became the mud, and still I gather up their shapes in dreams, those poor leftover Easter eggs all grey. That's how we found out death, the strangled bird, undone by a toy hung in his cage. The foundling that would never last the night, be it pigeon, crippled snake, the kitten, whose very fleas forsook it in the morning, while we nursed a hangover of hope. After the death of pets, dolls too lay still, and wooden in the cradle. Sister, after, we learned death, not hell, not ghosts or angels, but a cold thing in the image of a warm thing, limp as sleep without the twitch of dreams. So obviously that's not one involving the sort of the ancient Greek mythological figures, but it's a beautiful meditation on death through the sort of death of pets and then the passing of sort of childhood of dolls. I just thought it was fabulous. And that whole first, it's called The Afterlife, that collection. It is about death and mortality, and I thought it was superb. The other collections are much more domestic, and there are some really, really good poems lines. There's one about glitter and how it sort of gets stuck everywhere and you can't get rid of it, and its inappropriateness in certain situations. There's one about carousel horses. There's one, a brilliant poem where she's looking at her family of her husband and her 2 kids and sort of down on her knees giving thanks to God and praise to God that they're not a family in the dinghies in the Mediterranean of migrants who are trying to get to safety in the West, and a lot of them of course die and perish and wash up on the coastline of Greece, Greek islands, and of Italy as well. It's a wonderful poem. You'll notice in the poem I read out that there was very little rhyme there. Her domestic poems, collections 2, 3, 4, 5, there's a lot of rhyme. And I find that the poems I like, that I'm absolutely sucked into, the rhymes didn't present a problem. It's the less engaging poems, at least engaging to me, where the rhymes suddenly seem clunky, some of them, that you can see her reaching for them. And in doing so, it pulls you out of the meter because you're lurching towards what's going to rhyme with that word I just read, rather than flowing with what the text on the page is. And sometimes those rhymes are very clunky, as I say. Sometimes they're very abrupt. So I did find her propounding of more classical, more traditional poetry slightly unconvincing. Now that may be down to personal taste, because I've read an awful lot of non-rhyming poetry in the last 2-3 years. That's not to say that all of her rhyming poems fail, because they don't. As I say, if I'm sucked in by the opening lines, if I'm sucked in by the opening metaphor, the rhymes aren't a problem. But there are quite a few poems where that was not the case. This is called Dyeing the Easter Eggs. Dyeing the Easter eggs, the children talk of dying. Resurrection's in the air like the whiff of vinegar. These eggs won't hatch, my daughter says, since they are cooked and dead, a hard-boiled batch. I am the children's blonde American mother who thinks that Easter eggs should be pastel, but they have icon eyes and they are Greek, and eggs should be, they've learned at school this week, blood red. We compromise and some are yellow or blue, or red and blue, assorted purples, mauves, but most are crimson, hermatic hue. Rubbed to a sheen with a chrism of olive oil, they will not spoil. As Christian death is a preservative, as Jesus trampled death and harrowed hell, the kids' palms are incarnadine and violet. A mess, go and wash your hands. They wash their hands, punctilious as Pontius Pilate. So because I like that poem, because its subject is death, and in a way it's a throwback to her first collection, the rhymes didn't jolt me out of it, but as I read it, I did find some of them, as I say, a bit sort of overreaching. Rubbed to a sheen with a chrism of olive oil, which is a beautiful line, they will not spoil. And that's what I mean by abrupt, that you've got this beautiful line, rubbed to a sheen with a chrism of olive oil, they will not spoil. It just seems a bit sort of accelerated. It sort of jolts me out of the meter, although presumably that's the intended meter. Anyway, I got a lot out of this, 4 stars. And that's it. That's my recent reads. I'm still ploughing through The Discovery of Heaven by the Dutch author Harry Mulisch. I think that's his name. 700 pages. I'm up to 500 pages. So, till next time. Thanks very much.